we missed Monday's show because of Memorial Day. It feels like we've been away for 2 to 3 weeks. So you may recall last Wednesday we had Gegard Mousasi on the program, and Mousasi was quite open about his frustrations regarding the new Bellator regime, aka the PFL. Well, Thursday afternoon, we got word that Mousasi had been released from the PFL, just like that. And so we told you the story about Scott Coker signing him to that new contract for the same amount of money that he was making before, PFL not knowing about this, being unhappy about it. He had openly complained over the last few months about not getting a fight. They decide to meet with him in Paris at their event a couple weeks ago. Seems like maybe they're trying to figure this out. Maybe he takes a pay cut. Maybe they restructure the contract. He came on the show, and I haven't gotten confirmed that the things that he said on the show were the nail in the coffin, but I know they didn't sit well. And so on Thursday afternoon, they released him. And so I've asked him to come back on the show to talk about it. At this time, he is not talking, but that's one thing that happened since we last spoke. Perhaps there will be a question or two about this. Friday afternoon, oh, by the way, also on Thursday, we found out that Carlos Ulberg was in fact going to replace Khalil Roundtree against Jamal Hill at UFC 303 on June 29th. And you'll recall Ulberg, when he was on the show, was very poignant in his remarks when I asked him what could be next. He specifically mentioned that fight. He specifically mentioned that fight being a possibility as maybe an opportunity to back someone up or to step in. And then we find out about Roundtree's suspension, which will only be 2 months, so he should be able to come back maybe by the end of the summer, early fall. Reached out to him to get his side of the story. He put out a very forthright statement, but for now, not speaking as well. In steps Ulberg in, without a doubt, the biggest fight of his career against Jamal Hill. We think at that moment that that fight is going to be the co-main event for the much-anticipated return of one Conor McGregor. But then we find out on Friday afternoon that it's not going to be that fight. It's going to be Ian Gary versus Michael Venom Page. At least I think it should be that. They haven't quite distinguished where everyone is going to be fighting, but that's the bigger fight in my opinion. And it is Ian Gary versus MVP. Ian Gary wanted to fight on that June 29th card come hell or high water. He was even suggesting names, and the UFC couldn't figure it out. Obviously, the top choice was Colby. Colby, it has been said, is still banged up, nursing, I do believe, an injured foot. And so then there was talk of him fighting on the July 27th Manchester card, but that didn't work out. And so they figured it out. And that's what we're going to talk to Michael Venom Page about. And so that's a huge, huge addition for multiple reasons. The main one being it's a gigantic card. And now you have Ian Gary, who at times has had a hard time connecting with the Irish people in particular. Now he's going to be fighting on the same card as his hero, as his idol, who he is a byproduct of. He doesn't become an MMA fighter if not for Conor McGregor. And so now you link them, and at the press conferences and all fight week long, they are a tandem. This is huge. He gets the rub. He gets the love from Conor and his fans. This was the card he had to be on, and they figured it out. We also found out on Friday that for the first time since 2015, Conor is going back to Dublin, not to fight, but to take part in a press conference with Michael Chandler. This card doesn't need to be sold. This card doesn't need any more promotion. Just them announcing it was enough, reading off a piece of paper. But I love this idea. Credit to the UFC, credit to Conor, credit to Chandler, who had been talking about doing something like this way back when. He's the perfect guy to take part in something like this because he's the kind of guy who embraces these things. The moment this was announced, he had his own video ready, which I thought was great. He's doing the American angle, him walking on a plane. He will relish being in enemy territory. It's also going to be taking place at the 3 Arena, which is where Conor fought Brandao in 2014, which is also where Katie Taylor had her 2 fights. That's the venue. That's where Bellator PFL have hosted their events as well. And so this is happening next Monday, like this coming Monday in like 5 days. And Chandler's going to be there and Conor's going to be there, and we presume Dana White is going to be there. Everyone deserves all the credit in the world. It's perfect for Conor to reconnect with his fans, to reconnect with the country, to reconnect with the fan base. It's great for Chandler. He's going to get booed. He's going to love it. It's brilliant. Doing it at the 3 Arena is brilliant. There's, 10 years ago, he was there against Brandao, not here to take part, here to take over, all that stuff. I saw an interview with Conor McGregor and Oscar Willis of the Mac Life, and Conor was sort of hinting at this. He didn't announce it, but he gave props to Lene, the head of PR for the UFC, for coming up with this. And she deserves that props because it's a brilliant idea. Here's the one part that hasn't been announced yet that needs to happen. If I may offer one piece of advice, you need to get Ian Gary on that dais, because it's one thing to have him on the dais in Vegas the week of June 29th. It's another to have him on the dais on Monday alongside Conor, even if it's a press conference before the press conference, if it's two separate press conferences. The whole point of this fight game is to build stars, and it's to use established stars to build future stars. And that's what boxing has gotten wrong over the last few years. They have not done a good job of putting up-and-coming stars on the same cards as the established main eventers. This card on June 29th is one of the better Conor McGregor cards in quite some time, because look at the card when he fought Cerrone. Look at the cards when he fought Dustin Poirier. They were quite thin, if we're being honest. I love this card. Ian Gary's on there. He gets the rub. MVP is on there. He gets the rub. Ulberg's on there. He gets the rub. Jamal Hill is on there. He gets the rub. Peyton Talbot, who I think is a future superstar, he's on there. Joe Pyfer is on there. They're clearly putting some up-and-coming stars that they have invested in who don't cost a lot of money, who aren't champions. You don't need that. But it's not just a hodgepodge of random characters. Everything that they're doing leading up to this is primo. I just think Ian Gary needs to be on that dais on June 5th, next Monday, June 3rd, excuse me, when Conor is reconnecting with the audience, because it will just be magic for him. And it's the missing ingredient. It's the missing thing from, all this talk of like, why isn't he connecting? Is he connecting? Is he not connecting? Like, this is it. This is what he's missing. So let's get that done. Other things that have happened. We find out today, this morning, breaking news from Turki Al-Sheikh, who tells us that the rematch between Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk is now scheduled for December 21st. October always seemed too early. It doesn't really seem like Riyadh season has to start at a particular time, maybe for them, but like these fights are happening this weekend. It happened 2 weeks ago. It was supposed to be October to March. December 21st, they're going back. That's the rematch date. God bless. Then we find out about an hour or so ago that the card in Abu Dhabi on August 3rd has now turned into one of the most star-studded fight nights in recent memory. I don't want to sit here and say, oh, the greatest fight night of all time, who the hell knows? We say this all the time. But take a listen to these 5 fights that Dana White has announced. One of them we knew already, the main event, Corey Sandhagen versus Umar Nurmagomedov, huge fight at 135. That's the main event, massive title implications. He then officially confirms that Marlon Chito Vera is on the card as well, and he's going up against Davison Figueiredo, who's now 2-0 at 135, who's coming off the win over Cody Garbrandt at UFC 300, who's, a big win over Chito Vera away from becoming a contender at 135. Obviously, Chito needs to get back on track after the UFC 299 fight against Sean O'Malley. Love it. He also announces that Mackenzie Dern is going up against Lupi Godinez on this card. Solid fight. Like it. He also announces that Michael Chiesa is on this card, and he's been out for a little bit as well, going up against Tony Ferguson at 170. Feels like do or die for Tony Ferguson. A lot of people thought it would be do or die against Paddy Pimblett. He's getting one last chance against Michael Chiesa. All right. And then hit the breaking news, Frank. For the first time in 2.5 years, for the first time since 2021, the original Stockton fighter, the beloved Nick Diaz, the older brother of one Nathan Diaz, is coming back as well. Nick Diaz on the card at 170 pounds against Vicente Luque. What? Nick Diaz at 170 pounds in a 5-minute round fight. So it's the co-main. And so I have some intel on all of this because I had an opportunity to speak to some of the people who have knowledge of this. This has been in the works for quite some time, I'm told. Nick was initially pushing for a GSP fight. Didn't come to fruition. He was then pushing for a Colby Covington fight at UFC 300. Didn't come to fruition. He then, after MVP's win and debut at 299, pushed for that fight on the June 29th Conor McGregor card, UFC 303. Didn't come to fruition. He then pushed for Kevin Holland on the June 29th card. Thought that was going to be the one. But as you know, it didn't come to fruition. Kevin Holland is fighting Michal Oleksiejczuk this weekend in Newark. And so at that point, they were going back and forth, back and forth. He wants to fight. He's ready to go. He's in Houston training. He has gotten rid of all the baggage. He's gotten rid of all the partying, all that stuff. I'm told he's in a great mental, physical, spiritual space right now. And they say, what about Vicente Luque in Abu Dhabi? Initially, didn't want to go overseas. I'm told the people in Abu Dhabi want Nick Diaz. I think there's a jockeying of position between Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia. And if I'm being honest, I think this card is more intriguing as far as the names are concerned than the one in Saudi Arabia. They're both great cards and great main events, but like Nick Diaz out of nowhere getting on this card. And so he is going to go to Abu Dhabi and he's going to fight Vicente Luque in a 5-round co-main event. And so Nick Diaz is back for the first time since September of 2021 when he fought Robbie Lawler. The last time he won a fight was October of 2011. And this fight is happening in August of 2024. Nick Diaz is back. And so that's all the stuff that has happened since we last spoke. I thought we were going to come on here, answer some questions, talk about the Conor presser and MVP versus Ian Gary. But let me go to the guys here before we get to the questions, because I don't even know if there are questions, if I'm being honest. Let me see here. I asked people for updated questions. Maybe they obliged. Rick, are you there?
I'm here.
Your reaction to Nick Diaz coming back 13 years after his last win, 3 years after what we thought might have been his last fight.
Understandable. Like, you need people who draw the kind of attention that he does. You need people who get fans talking about fights in the way that he does. To me, it feels very much like the way when WWE goes to Saudi Arabia or whatever, and they want to roll out Goldberg or somebody who's not like a current top star, but somebody from the era where it felt like the sport or the entertainment was at its best, and a name that people recognize. And Nick Diaz is that name. I think it's a lot more interesting and a lot more fascinating with the context that you provided, that he asked for GSP and all these other different names before it got to Vicente Luque. Kevin Holland at the press conference, or at the media day rather, earlier today, confirmed that like he was offered the fight but turned it down because he wanted to fight earlier. That could have been fun. He had just been booked to fight Nate, right? Was that the fight that
Kevin
fell
Holland?
apart? No. He jumped into the Hamza fight. Who was he supposed to fight? Tony? What was that fight?
Who are you talking about?
Holland jumped into. Holland.
He fought MVP.
No.
What was the one?
He's talking about
279.
279. Kevin Holland was supposed to fight Hamzat. Fought Kevin Holland.
Nate
Diaz fought Tony Ferguson.
Who was Holland's original opponent?
Hamzat.
Tony?
No.
Tony.
Tony? Okay. I thought for a second it was Nate. Who was Nate fighting?
Hamzat.
Nate was fighting Hamza. Okay.
Yes.
Anyway, I went down a different path Tuesday. Anyway, he's a star and somebody you need. And to be honest, after Luque's last performance, like, that fight feels fine to me. I don't have a problem with it.
What do you think, GC? Because when I think of Nick Diaz and I think of the return fight, to me, it's the beginning of the GC era on this program. We always talk about that card, right? And so you kind of get introduced to this crazy world. And let's be honest, a bit of a sad scene, right? This is like
very sad, yeah.
You could be a new fan and watch that fight against Robbie Lawler, and even the aftermath where Robbie Lawler is like, hey man, you good? Like, if you need anything, and even watch some of the pre-fight interviews and be like, this is the guy that all of you talk about in such glowing terms and like admire and love and adore and idolize. This is the guy. By now you figured it out and you know what it all means. But how do you feel about that guy coming back 3 years later?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. Like, that's the first thing that I thought of. UFC 266 was like the first pay-per-view we did once I joined the program. And I was all in on the Nick Diaz train, sort of like the aura around him, everyone talking about him, hyped for him to come back. And then just as the week went on, you know, the sparring footage came out, or like the shadow boxing footage came out, and he looked really slow. And it got more and more concerning in the lead up to the fight. And then, like, you know, he was putting up decent volume, but then like essentially just sort of just called it in the middle of the third round and or whatever round that was, and then Robbie Lawler coming up and asking if he's all right. Yeah, it was sort of a sad scene. It was definitely deflating to watch. And now I don't know about him coming back 3 years after that. And I know Vicente Luque didn't look good in his last performance, but if you go to the performance before that, 9 months ago against RDA, like he looked pretty fantastic. And there's a real world where that's what happens again. He's still only 32 years old. He's going to be 8 years younger than Nick Diaz. I know someone has mentioned that like there's a rule that the Diaz brothers won't fight the same opponent. But man, having Tony Ferguson and Nick Diaz fighting on the same card in the same weight class and not fighting each other, both at 40 years of age, feels like
that feels like the fight, right?
Yeah, it feels like a letdown, man. Because Chiesa, he's 36, but he's still quite younger than Tony Ferguson, especially in terms of mileage.
Based on what you saw from Luque in his last fight, that was against Joaquin Buckley. You were there.
Sure, I was there. Yeah, it was a perplexing performance.
You don't think this is a winnable fight?
No, it's definitely winnable. Of course it's winnable. I mean, it's a fight, and neither of these guys have looked good of late, so of course it's winnable. But, like, I don't know what happened to Luque between the RDA fight and the Buckley fight, but, like, he looked good against RDA in, I believe, August of last year. And he went all 5 rounds. I could see that happening in this one. We have some pictures here, Diaz, he appears to be in good shape. I mean, we got the picture of him running with Derek Lewis and everything, but like he appears to be in good shape. Like he's dropping sparring footage and everything. So like maybe he's, like you said, like maybe he's dropped all the baggage and he's ready to go. And like
I'm told he's training with Shakur Stevenson. He's training around Jared Anderson,
Jersey boy,
who's a heavyweight, obviously. But I mean, look, you can't go off of that.
Of course not.
One quick aside: it was Holland, D-Rod, Li Jingliang, Tony Ferguson.
Yes.
Rick got us on the 279. Yes, I don't know.
Leach had the unbelievable suit. I mean, yeah, that was a legendary.
Guys, we have an update regarding 279
what
for you.
What a crazy card.
That was
crazy
such a
thing
card.
that was.
I mean, you remember the weigh-ins, like everything going on.
I was trying to say they would have fought somebody that they both fought, but actually, Connor's point about like it could have been Tony would have been much more interesting to me.
Oh God, that's the fight right there. If these guys are back to back on the card, there's a world where we see them both lose and both like retire. Just like
Nick has, I think it's like 4 or 5 fights left, so it's not like he can retire. We saw him at the Jake Paul, Nate Diaz fight, and he's like, I want in, I want next, all that stuff. So. Clearly, he wanted to fight.
Him having not won a fight since 2011 is jarring.
Yes, it is.
Well,
It is important to note that there's. I'm not trying to but there's only been 4 fights. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand, but still, that's crazy. Like 2011,
he was out for 6 years, and it felt longer, to be honest, between the Anderson fight and the Robbie Lawler fight. One thing that I'll mention, and maybe in the future this can come out. I had heard that he was on a path to being in a really good spot. For the Robbie Lawler fight, and then, some old faces popped up at the 11th hour and got him off that path. This is what I'm being told, and this is why he showed up the way in which he showed up for that fight. This is what people are saying. Now, I get that there's trepidation from fans, from people who supported him, and really, like, he had some of the most loyal fans in the history of the sport. But, you look at that and maybe we hear from him and we see him in a different light and different space. Maybe you start to say, like, okay, he could potentially beat a Vicente Luque. He is 40. We're obviously seeing people who are older than 40 fight these days. Let's see. Let's see where he's at. If Nick Diaz is in good shape, if he's in a good spot mentally, physically, if he looks the way he looks in those pictures and videos, because we saw that. Remember, we saw that leading up to the Lawler fight, and then he showed up looking completely different. If that's truly what he's doing and he's around the right people, I think he can win this. I really do. He hasn't taken a ton of damage over the last few years. It's just a matter of where he's at and who's around him and what the distractions are and all that stuff. So,
and can you imagine the scenes?
In Abu Dhabi, they'll go crazy.
If he gets a dub, I mean, just the whole MMA world will just go absolutely nuts. Imagine if him and Tony both come out victorious at this card. I mean, it'll be unbelievable. That card is shaping up.
Can we just talk
Cheeto
about
versus Figgy's a banger too.
Cheeto versus Figgy? What about just like combat sports right now? It just doesn't even like it all defies boxing defies logic at this point. The UFC schedule, I know there were some jokes about like between 300 and 301 and like it hasn't been great, but it's starting to pick back up, and then 302 this weekend could be an all-time moment. And it's a, it's a solid enough pay-per-view. The co-main is great. It's sort of flying under the radar, I think. Then you've got 303. Prior to that, you have the Saudi debut. Manchester's coming up. This is on August 3rd. We suspect that they're going to come back to, we know we're going to Perth, but DDP and Izzy's going to be on there. By the way, August 3rd is turning out to be an insane day because that's also the debut of the Riyadh season card here in America and LA with Terrence Crawford and so many other people. Like, there's just so much. There's so much.
It's like you can't go more than a few days without something crazy happening. There's just always something. It's wild.
Thanks for watching. We appreciate it very much. Hey, if you like this video, give us the old thumbs up. Subscribe as well. You could get many more of these videos on the channel, so please do that. We would love you forever if you did so.